Manx Radio Podcasts, powered by Shaw.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Hello and welcome to the latest look back at Talking Heads. Border identity checks, international aid, and the inquiry into the Iraq War was some of the topics up for discussion this week. Here's Stu Peters with more.
Talking Heads, brought to you by Magic Carpets, with the only Carndine design showroom on the island.
Should the public be consulted over possible changes to the island's abortion laws? A group, Campaign for Abortion Law Modernisation, CALM, has been set up to lobby for modernisation of the legislation. And it's an issue that came up for discussion at an evening of Any Questions on Friday evening. Health and Social Care Minister Howard Quayle.
I'm a little bit disappointed with this group because all they had to do was come to the department and ask us about what our views were, and they would have been advised that as a department we'd already put in our legislative programme for next year to go out to consultation with the public to ask the public of the Isle of Man's opinion on what they want to happen. So we are more than happy to look at amending the legislation to bring it in line with United Kingdom legislation, but an awful lot of their concerns I feel are, I'm not saying unnecessary, but we'd already agreed to look at this, and I think had they checked with us, they should have been reassured that actually we're going out to the public and it's not something that we're refusing to discuss.
Should the public be consulted over possible changes to the law on abortion in the Isle of Man, or should changes to bring the legislation into line with the UK's laws be made as a matter of course? This is from Sharon. She says, Stu, I attended the first public meeting on this subject. There are a number of professional staff from the Department of Health and Social Care. In addition, Mr Peake was also present. Is that Ralph Peake, who's now in MHK? I strongly refute the Minister of Health's comments that he already had this on his to-do list, so to speak. Those people working in the field, along with Mr Peake, were very definitely not supporting that this was already in hand. Hence the group proceeded where the Department of Health had failed to do so. This is blatant electioneering on behalf of Mr Quayle. I'm not surprised but disappointed. Just wanted to point out that Mr Quayle is incorrect when he says that the group has wasted their time. I understand, as an aside, that Mr Quayle was invited to the very first meeting at the Manx Legion, but we were advised that he had other commitments, therefore couldn't attend. He can't therefore say that he knew about this and it was proceeding. If he did, he would have had the opportunity to say so at that point in time. Happy to set the record straight, Stu. Thank you very much for getting in touch, Sharon, and telling us your side of this. Very interesting. I don't think that people should be able to have multiple abortions and have abortions as a lifestyle choice, and this is happening in the adjacent island. The choice should be before conception. Yes, I think I agree with that. I don't think that if somebody needs a subsequent termination, then they ought to be refused, but maybe they ought to be charged for it. And certainly people shouldn't be able to do that as a lifestyle choice. Hey, Stu, by the looks of it, and listening to old Harry Boy, he's out of his depth on this subject, as with most issues in health. Better he sticks to buying off-the-peg care homes. Opinions and facts, says Frank. I'm not quite sure which the facts are in there, Frank, but I don't know. I mean, there's been a bit of a ruckus about this care home. Isn't it good value for 60-odd rooms, wasn't it? 8 million quid. I don't know what the going rate is for those things, but maybe, I don't know. This from John, he says, the only people who are pro-abortion are living. Now, there's a philosophical position on it, I suppose. Yeah, I can't disagree with you. They're the only people who can vote on it then, really, aren't they? Or consult on it, I suppose. So that means it's a done deal. Not necessarily. I know that a lot of people object to abortion on religious grounds, for example. So there are people who would object to this. But do you think there needs to be a consultation on it? That's the question. The guilt after this procedure is huge. I can imagine that, actually. Can the mental health department in the Isle of Man cope with women and men who've had to deal with this situation for whatever reason the abortion had to be done? The 1995 Termination of Pregnancy Medical Defences Act started out as a cut and paste of the UK's Abortion Act, but was amended by Tynwald to make it more of an Isle of Man thing, and in the process made it more restrictive and discriminatory. Those who were around at the time tell me that without those amendments the Act wouldn't have got through at all, and we'd still have been stuck in the dark days with illegal backstreet abortions. So we're now stuck in a situation where women who choose to have an abortion for any other reason than rape, mental health issues signed off by a psychiatrist, or extreme fetal anomalies have to go off island at their own expense, which can cost up to £2,000. On top of that, there's evidence that some GPs don't offer any help at all, not even the phone number of a reputable legal clinic in the UK. Or there's the other option, buying safe but illegal abortion tablets off the internet, run the risk of them being stopped at the post office and being prosecuted. The law has to be changed, and your first correspondent was right when she said that Howard Quayle is weaseling, my word, his way around this. I'm convinced that going out to consultation is just a code for putting the decision off even longer. CALM is not promoting abortions for everyone. It wants women in the Isle of Man to have the choice that their sisters, cousins, friends in England, Scotland and Wales have. Thanks from Susie, I think that is, in Ramsey. Why would Howard Quayle want to put this out to consultation? It's to do with a woman's right to choose, and religious leaders, mainly male, shouldn't be given the opportunity to have a say in the matter, says Wendy. That's kind of my view on it, Wendy, I think. Good value maybe, just too convenient, says somebody else. Stu, the government put out to consultation about their free Tynwald banquet at the Villa Marina. Don't do your usual defending them speech, Stu. This practice needs to stop and they should pay towards their party, says Ian. In that case, I'll not say anything. Let's go to the lines. We're talking about abortion law in the Isle of Man, and we've got Marie on. Hello, Marie.
Hi, Stu.
Sorry, Marie. No, not Marie, is it? It's Marie.
Basically, the law should be changed.
Yeah.
In this day and age, no one has the right to tell a woman what she can and cannot do with her body.
I agree.
95%.
Oh, these digital phones. Dave sent me a text. I thought it was called democracy. Okay, fair dues. What's the point of MHKs if everything has to be done by referendum and consultation? It's a cop-out. Make the decisions they're elected to make and have the guts to stand by them, right or wrong, says Cliffy. I think we might have got Mary back, hopefully on a better line. Hello, Mary.
Right, 95% of abortions are actually done before 12 weeks.
Yes.
3% are done between 12 and 20 weeks. And 2% are done over 20 weeks.
Yeah.
Of those 2% done over 20 weeks, all but a handful are for medical reasons.
Sure.
Sure. So people who get head up about the figures going, oh, people are going to have abortions at 24 weeks. In reality, it doesn't really happen unless the parents are given an extremely tough choice.
Yes. I mean, frankly, you know, if somebody was even considering it, it's one of those things that you would want to get sorted out sooner rather than later. It can only get more difficult if you leave it too long, can't it?
Totally. And how it stands at the minute, people are saying, oh, have an 8-week limit or a 12-week limit. It doesn't really work like that. First of all, most women don't find out they're pregnant until minimum 5-6 weeks.
Sure.
Then you have to have a few weeks for it to sink in.
Yeah.
Even if that takes a week, if you have an 8-week minimum, it's not going to happen because you have minimum 2 weeks. I keep saying minimum. You have 2 weeks to be able to get the 2 doctors to sign you off to get the procedure done.
Yes. Yeah.
So how it stands, take emotion. You have to take emotion out of it. You have to take the thought that this is a baby. It's not. It's a fetus.
Yeah.
You have to take that out of the equation because very, very rarely does it happen after 20 weeks
Gotcha.
for a healthy fetus.
What would you say, though, to the contributor earlier who said that across in the UK, there are people who keep going back time and time again for abortions because they're using it as an alternative almost to contraception?
No, that's media hype, to
Is
be
it?
honest with you. You have a small percentage of women who do that, but it is extremely small compared to the percentage of abortions that people have. But who are we to turn around and say to someone, well, you can't have an abortion because you had one 5 years ago?
Sure.
It's that lady's body. I'm sorry, no one has the right to tell me what I can and cannot do with my body.
Yeah.
If a woman does not want to continue with the pregnancy for whatever reason, she should have the right to terminate it.
Yes. Yeah.
So she should.
Well, after sensible counselling, I mean, I don't know that anybody would take the decision lightly, but people might be pressured into making the decision or whatever. So I think that it's important that there is an amount of counselling beforehand, but I'm sure that would happen anyway.
Yeah, and that's why you need the 2 doctors to sign off on it.
Yeah.
You just can't walk into a clinic and say, oh, I want an abortion.
Yeah.
You have to have counselling. You have to have 2 doctors to sign off on it. That's
Okay.
a sensible way to do it. And those doctors do speak to you about it. It's not a case of, well, okay, we'll just sign the letter. They actually sit and talk to you. And there's counselling sessions across the UK.
And do you think that we need our own legislation in the Isle of Man? Are there any differences between us that would require our own legislation, or could we literally just cut and paste what they've got in the UK?
I say cut and paste what they have in the UK. It works. It's been working for since the 60, 50 years.
Yes.
Why change it? Why force women to go across a very traumatic time of their life whenever they need their friends and family about them? Why make it stigmatised? It shouldn't be stigmatised.
All right, some great points there, Mary. Thank you very much for calling, and thanks for hanging on while we got you back. Stu, you said that adoption is a more traumatic option than abortion, but for whom? Ask those who've been adopted if they'd rather not have been born. Yeah, again, that's a sort of a philosophical debate. Nobody could answer that question, could they, surely? Ask those who are unable to have their own children naturally and who've adopted. It's just far too simplistic to regard any pregnancy as an inconvenience that can just be wiped out, says Dave. Friday night, after the Any Questions, I went home and copied the UK legislation, 1967, and Isle of Man did. It took 10 minutes. This is from Jane Della. Highlighted sections that need a legislative draftsman to check relevance. I'll be sending this to the Minister. Please pass it on to Calm. I would reiterate my point, as is every individual should have the right to choose. Legislation should enable that choice. I'm not giving a personal opinion on my views on abortion. That from Jane Della, who was one of the voices that we heard earlier on from the Any Questions. This current government couldn't grade eggs without going out to public consultation. Make the decision. If wrong, bite the bullet, says Peter.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Should the island have identity checks at more of its borders? The publication of the results of a consultation into border controls in the island has been delayed because of the sheer number of responses to it. The Home Affairs Minister revealed the delay while giving evidence to the Social Affairs Policy Review Committee last week. But could the whole question be thrown into the air again after Brexit, the UK vote to leave the EU? Are identity checks at all of the island's borders a good idea? If the UK does take steps to break away from the EU, could they become inevitable? Or should steps be taken to try and avoid them? I think I must be missing a point here. I'm not able to read between the lines of this because it's too short. Hey boy, is Juan Watterson suitably qualified to make comment? Asks G. Well, yeah, he's the Home Affairs Minister. Or am I missing something? There, I'm not sure. Let's go quickly to the lines. We've got Ken on. Hello, Ken.
I contributed to this border control.
You and 1,000 others by the sound of it.
Basically, either bring it in properly with proper biometric passports,
yes,
or don't do anything.
Okay.
Because the pitfalls are, the Balmoral's coming on a day trip. You can have those, have to have approved IDs. What do you do with people that lose their ID? Who's going to pay for them? I can't get on the boat because... I've lost that. Where's that?
Well, I suppose that the rules are that if somebody turns up on a boat, on any boat, and they've not got the right papers, then they're just not allowed to disembark. It's as simple as that.
Well, yeah, you got your ticket, but you haven't got your ID.
Your fault. If you know that you've got to take an ID with you. I mean, if you go down to the airport and you've not got an ID, they won't let you on the flight, and that's the end of it.
Well, that's not actually true, is it? Because you don't do for certain flights, you don't. And then other things, you've got to produce it about 3 times.
Well, I thought it was pretty much all flights you had to
I'm
provide.
just wondering,
ID
the consultation, like government, general, consultations, take notice if it's the answer they want. Being a bit, and also some consultations about the abortion thing. Would it be only the zealots that go on and complete it? So how many people's views make a valid consultation?
Well, that's the trouble with consultations, isn't it? In that, it's the vocal minority that have the say, and it's very easy to skew opinion if that's all that you see.
I do think it's basically, I'm not decrying, the public myself, that perhaps it's a waste of time asking the public for their views. There are trade associations that the public should make representations to. Okay. And then they... that's the other people, because it just costs more money.
Yeah, all right. Some good thoughts there. Thank you, Ken. What else have we got? The only border checks that our government could enforce would be when we leave the island. The checks at the airport are conditions of contract with the airlines. If you don't want to disclose your identity, you don't fly. Steam Packet would have to make it part of its contract with you, as there's no legal requirement to confirm identity. Not everybody carries ID documents. Your passport requires all to let pass freely without let or hindrance, says Norman. Still, I can't count the number of times I've flown on or off the island and have never, ever not been asked to produce photo ID. I believe it should also have to be produced on the boat, both on arrival and departure. That from Pam. Good stuff. To the lines, let's see what Stephen makes of this. Stephen.
Well, I'm just astounded that it's got this far. Really, why do we need more protection than any other of the islands off the main coast of Britain, we live in a common travel area that ensures that we can all have travel uninterrupted and unheeded by these petty checks. They might make people feel better, but it's well known that if there's going to be a terrible incident, then that'll happen regardless, and it's only annoying people and making it more difficult to get to the island. Maybe some of these people who come up with the ideas should go and look at the rest of our towns. Phil, Stu, they're absolutely empty of people. And are we really saying that we in the Isle of Man are more frightened or need greater protection than the Isle of Wight?
Well, yes,
islands.
I take your point, and I think that there's probably a lot of validity in what you say. But I mean, nowadays people are much more security conscious because of all these outrages that we've heard about around the world.
Well, if we give in, then we've failed, and they've won. We can't live our life with the having all these worries and checks.
Yeah, well, I will accept that as well.
Between London and Manchester, for example, or Liverpool and London, we don't have roadblocks. They carry on and get on with it.
Yeah.
And whoever has dreamt this up and frightened the population into thinking this will make them much safer in their beds, they should be ashamed.
Well, that's an interesting point of view, I must admit. I'd not thought about it that way, Stephen, but in many ways you're absolutely right, I think. Just looking at it from the other point of view, though, isn't it maybe a good source of intelligence for the cops and the authorities here to know exactly who's here at any one time?
Well, I would. No, it's not. It's they don't need to know that. That's not their remit to know where everybody is. We don't have a society that's constantly surveilled to see where you are. But why don't you get a little chipper in your neck and we can all have a map of the Isle of Man and we'll know where everybody is then? You don't need to have that level of surveillance.
All right, yeah. No, valid point. Thank you very much for sharing that with us, Stephen. Yes, I'd not thought about it that way, but I suppose he makes a very good point there. Stu, this came up many years ago in the statutes of the Isle of Man in the year 1417, Section 4. You had to obtain a licence. If you left without it, it could be a felony and you could forfeit all your goods to the Lord of Man, says Norman. Wow. What else have we got? The current mode of terrorism doesn't see whether or not we're mere mortals or VIPs. To his mind, we're infidels, and even if you are within their faith, they don't worry about fellow worshippers becoming collateral damage. I don't know what planet Stevie's on, but come back to the real world, says Chris M. Okay.
Talking Heads, brought to you by Magic Carpets, with the only Carndine design showroom on the island.
You're listening to the latest Talking Heads podcast, featuring highlights from the programme over the past week.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Should the Isle of Man increase its contribution in international aid? Campaigners are calling on the government to meet its pledge to pay 0.7% of gross income in aid, and that pledge was to have taken place by 2015. It's been missed. The Isle of Man Overseas Aid Committee was rebranded as the Isle of Man International Development Committee in early 2013. A campaign's been launched to lobby for an increase in the amount allocated each year. Those behind the campaign presented a petition for redress of grievance at Tynwald Hill yesterday. So, should the island reconsider the amount it gives in overseas aid? Could it be damaging to the island's international reputation if it lags so far behind other jurisdictions? Or is the time wrong to even consider an increase? Is the island already contributing enough, do you think? Or should the amount be reviewed? Stu, in a word, no, says Brian. Nice to get to somebody first who's not sitting on any fence at all. Thank you, Brian. Let's give all the tax the church pays to the Overseas Development Fund. Well, a couple of flaws with that. I don't suppose that the church makes any money at all. It probably runs at a loss. And most corporations in the Isle of Man don't pay any corporation tax anyway, so I guess that the church would come under that if it was making any money. The Isle of Man, I think, contributes enough. I get concerned when I go into the local supermarket and they're asking for help with donations for local food banks. Should the islanders something now not come first? I know we don't know the real meaning of hungry, but it's now getting a bit nearer to home. Stu, what these people don't mention is the fact that we have food banks now in the island. We're struggling. Charity begins at home, says Bill. Stu, I think per square mile we probably give more than anywhere else in the world, says Ian. Yeah, but probably not internationally. I think probably on a local basis. Another thought, when the Isle of Man is as broke as it is, and we've got the massive pension pot to fill, then I'm afraid that charity must begin at home, says somebody else. Patrick called about this. He said, I don't think we should do more, and with Brexit, which causes so much uncertainty and many people on the island don't agree with, we should be looking to help ourselves. We need to consider our own situation urgently. Goodness knows what situation is going to develop. I don't agree with an increase to the in-contribution. I don't agree with giving anything at all. That may be unchristian, but I think we need to look after ourselves at the moment. Okay, it's definitely a point of view. There's also the worry if the people ever see the money, or are we just feeding their corrupt governments, asks Liz. Stu, I've personally been sending donations to various charities over many years. However, I do wonder if the leaders of some of the countries should do more themselves. I'm sure that they're not living in slums, tents, etc., and are not going without food. At the moment, I don't think we should give more money. The people of the Isle of Man have to keep paying more for various services because the government keeps putting costs up. Departments keep overspending. Last week I put food into the food bank. There comes a point where I can't spend as much money as I did previously. That from Katie. Well, thank you for getting in touch, Katie. I think you've probably touched a few nerves there, because I think that's the way that a good few people think. If you've got a point of view on this, should we actually try to probably spend 10 times more than we are doing now on overseas aid? That was the kind of number that was agreed to in 2008, and it hasn't happened for whatever reason. Probably a global recession didn't help the matter. But that aside, should we be trying to spend an awful lot more on overseas aid, or should charity begin at home? Correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't the Isle of Man keep winning the Poppy Cup for biggest contributor to the Poppy Fund per head of population? Yes, I think you're absolutely right about that. I don't know if that's a correction of me saying that a lot of people give to local charities rather than overseas ones. I would pretty much call the Poppy Appeal a local charity, to be honest. But yes, I think you're quite right. I think that we do usually come ahead of all the leagues in the UK and the British Isles as far as the Poppy Appeal is concerned. My gran used to say charity begins at home. Let's sort ourselves before we look to others. The economic situation's changed since 2008. Time to look inward, as the adjacent island always does. That from Bob T. Stu, if money is given to overseas charity, is money given to overseas charities guaranteed to end up in the right hands, asks David H. Stu, my family and myself are living on the breadline. We work full time, and at the end of each month we have very little money left over. We don't have an extravagant lifestyle. If this government honestly sees fit to take more money from us in the form of tax to make somebody else's life easier, I think that's totally unfair. I've already contributed more than enough to their lavish pension pot. If I had any spare cash, I'd give it to charity from my own free will. That from Bert in Port St Mary. Very good point, Bert. Very good point. Stu, I can't sit here and listen to the rubbish spouted by some of you contributors so far. If the Isle of Man government is short of money, then it either needs to raise more via taxes or reduce what it spends. Anyone can think that the best place to do that is to take the food from the mouths of a starving child who isn't lucky enough to live here, beggars belief. I'm a proud Manx man, but the pitiful amount that we give to overseas aid while still seemingly able to afford tax breaks for millionaires makes me ashamed of the Isle of Man. That from Chris. Well, there's a different point of view, and like I say, I'm not decided which is the right answer on that, but that's a pretty forceful point, and there's not much that you can criticise, I don't think, in terms of what Chris says. Or maybe you do disagree completely. To donate money is a personal choice. Government shouldn't be allowed to donate taxpayers' money. If government ministers wish to give money away, let it be their own. Okay. I think we do enough for charity overseas. There's not well-off people over here, so look after us first. That's from Ross in Macclesfield. Stu, 10 times less would be better, certainly for this island in present times, especially as the government is bankrupt, says Brian. No, the government's not bankrupt. Why are you referring to charity state aid from government to a government has nothing to do with charities? I don't believe that our overseas aid budget goes to other governments as such. I think it goes to worthy and charitable causes in various countries around the world, so it's not government to government. No man is an island entire of itself. Each man is a piece of a continent, a part of the whole. Each man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind. Therefore seek not to ask for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. John Donne, 17th century. Very relevant today. Let's hope that we never need such help, says Sue. Well, I don't think we'd get it, Sue, to be honest. And, yeah, okay. The trouble is, I've never really felt like that. And it's probably something missing in me, I suppose. But, Stu, not completely on topic, but on the related matter of charitable donations, on behalf of all the directors of Isle of Man Food Bank, I wonder if you could just give a big thanks to everybody who donated to the charities at our collection at Tesco's last weekend. As always, the local community was very generous, and we very much appreciate the support. It was good to see so many people willing to help others in the community. That's from Andrea on behalf of the Isle of Man Food Bank. Happy to put that out for you, Andrea. Let's go to the lines. We've got Vivian with a thought on this. Hello, Vivian.
I was brought up that charity had to begin at home.
Okay.
And as we are being told we have a lot of needy causes in the island, then why should we send more away? We do send a certain amount away. If it was properly used in the countries where it's really needed, it would probably go a long way. But is it paying for administrators and managers and all sorts of things? In that case, to me, it's a waste of money.
Okay. I think that an awful lot more of the money that people donate is going to the right areas these days than it used to be, but I understand your point.
Well, that's just my personal feeling on it. It does worry me. I mean, so the island is a very charitable island. I mean, so you know that, Stu. Money comes from all sources if it's really needed.
Okay. All right, Viv, thank you very much for your call today. Some more texts in on this. No, enough is enough. Whenever there is a disaster anywhere in the world, the Isle of Man is always very generous in donating money to help, and it goes to where it's needed, not into some despot's pocket. That from JC. Frank, no, have we got money to burn? Charity begins at home. Fact. Okay, it's 0.7% of the Isle of Man's income, not gross national product. All right, I'm happy to be corrected on that. One of the few decent things that David Cameron has done is to increase Britain's contribution to 0.7%, and people can still choose to give to individual charities. I give £25 a month to Oxfam for the last 40 years. I don't see it and I don't miss it, says Muriel. Well, that's all right, Muriel, and I think you're a wonderful person for doing it, but £25 a month would be a big chunk out of a lot of people's income. So, if you can afford it and it works for you, then great, but I don't think you can suggest that everybody should do that. Stu, the petitioners may be doing us all a big favour if their petition is picked up. It gives the opportunity to open a new debate on this topic, and I suspect that the historical standard, which they're pressing for the island to pay out, will have to be subject to very serious review to determine whether a far lower figure is actually appropriate to the strained times we now find ourselves in. All the best from John W. Thank you, John. I think a lot of this is driven by external forces. I think it's a case of, like I said earlier on, the Isle of Man doesn't want to be seen as being a pariah, so they need to set a percentage that doesn't make us look mean and too introverted to the international community, I suppose. People are right, we have food banks and poverty here on the Isle of Man. This is because of cuts to benefits and stealth charges brought in by the Treasury. A lot of overseas contributions often get put in the wrong hands of corrupt governments and dictators who hoard the money and let the people starve. It also funds weapons for armies. Regards from Michael. Rather than giving a cheque to the likes of Bob Geldof to send to Africa, I wouldn't give Bob Geldof the time of day. I think the money should be put into agriculture. I think some of it is. Then in the UK and here in the island, we could produce milk, wheat, barley or whatever they need and put it on the docks and ship it out to people in need. If that was done with the Syria situation, for example, a number of jobs and infrastructure would be created here and in the UK, and the food would still be provided to the migrants. When they get their country back up and running with the help of the UN or NATO, then they're still where they want to be with the families in their own country. The Isle of Man could tag onto a scheme like that and pledge to produce a certain amount of food. That way to create an industry within itself and create jobs in Britain rather than just handing over money. It's all right teaching people in other countries how to grow things, but they don't have the water for the crops because of climate change. They won't be able to grow anything anyway. Putting the money into industry here would create jobs and still get the goods to those who need it. Some good thoughts there, James, actually. Yeah, I quite like a lot of that. Manx people are not mean. No, not at all. There are loads of charities on the island who have to look after our own. Look at our hospice. We'd never have that if not for the locals. That's only one instance we run for everything that government won't provide, says Margaret. A definite no to overseas aid, increased donations to hospice instead. Our own cancer sufferers having to rely on charity to survive is disgraceful, according to Roger. Why do you keep saying the Isle of Man is not bankrupt? Well, because it isn't. It's just a matter of fact. Aid budget, while I'm always happy to donate to charities, I do find it strange that, for example, while Britain generally donates to causes in India, British jobs in call centres were lost to India. Strange, says Ian. I suppose there is an amount of irony involved in that, yeah. I'd like to know how the figure of 0.7% was arrived at. The UK is about the only country to donate this amount of money of all the developed countries, says Claire. Stu, this guilt trip attitude that Gorn and co try to lay on the island's population is not working. In fact, I feel it's doing the opposite. People who would normally chip in are saying enough is enough. That's according to Ray.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Should military action only ever be considered as a last resort? The long-awaited Iraq War inquiry strongly criticised Tony Blair for failing to exhaust peaceful options. He's accepted making some mistakes, but says he acted in good faith. Matt Steele reports.
Good morning, everyone.
After 7 years, Sir John Chilcott's report's finally out, and it's strongly critical of what happened in 2003.
Military action at that time was not a last resort.
He also found there was no imminent threat from Saddam Hussein, and the legal basis for war was far from satisfactory. And he revealed promises were made to the US 8 months before the conflict began.
On July the 28th, Mr. Blair wrote to President Bush with an assurance that he would be with him whatever.
The then Prime Minister still insists it was the right thing to do, though.
For all of this, I express more sorrow, regret, and apology than you may ever know or can believe.
But the families of soldiers killed in Iraq are angry. This is what Sarah O'Connor, whose brother was among the 179 fatalities, makes of the report.
I've gone back to that time when I learnt that my brother had been killed. And there is one terrorist in this world that the world needs to be aware of, and his name is Tony Blair, the world's worst terrorist.
David Cameron's promised lessons will be learnt.
Yes, Matt Steele reporting, should military action only ever be undertaken as a final resort? Or is it something that politicians must be able to consider as part of a range of options? Could restrictions make it difficult for future British leaders to act on the world stage with any confidence when it comes to the possibility of military action? Or is it right that more caution is shown in future when it comes to military invasions? Stu, I wonder how long before we get an inquiry into the Libyan fiasco, another example of Britain trying to be policeman of the world. Stu, Winston Churchill said it was better to jaw than war. He was right with that, but in the end, politicians start the war. It's the troops that finish it. That's their job. However, some politicians are egomaniacs and won't listen. Tony Blair was appointed as a peace envoy for the Middle East. There's been turmoil in those areas for years. He's achieved nothing but misery. OK, thank you. That's from Norman. I always thought Blair was Bush's lapdog. I think this report proves it. Mr. Blair should be tried for manslaughter, at the very least, tried for misleading the British public. Should have to pay for the extortionate amount his security cost the taxpayer out of some of the blood money he's made from speeches he's made after coming out of office. That's from Alan. Yeah, there was a programme on the telly the other day about how much money he's made since leaving the job of Prime Minister. It's a reasonable stipend, has to be said, but yes, whether or not you'd ever get any of that back, I very much doubt it. And, I think somebody's made the point about this thing about, lessons have been learned, time to move on. So this is it from Mick. It's taken 7 years for Chilcott to come up with what everybody knew already. Complete waste of time and money. Lessons will be learned. How often do we have to hear that ridiculous phrase? Invading other countries was always illegal, so what's new, says Mick. The only thing, and again, trying to sort of be as fair as possible about this, is it could have just as easily probably have gone the other way. Just supposing that when Britain and the coalition invaded Iraq, had they found, bunkers full of chemical weapons that could have taken out, whole swathes of the Middle East as far as Greece, then we might all be saying, well, why didn't you do something sooner? Because it was almost a global catastrophe that happened. Why didn't you act sooner? So I guess that, if you did act in good faith, and nobody will ever know that apart from him, I suppose, then, again, it's a case of 20/20 hindsight, isn't it? If you're the person who's in charge and has to make that decision, if you honestly believe that there is a clear and present danger, then you need to act on it. Stu, yes, I think military action should only be used as a last resort, but I do believe that Tony Blair trusted his gut instinct, or words to that effect about Saddam Hussein when I saw the report on this yesterday. Still not sure about the war it caused. That's from Kev. Thank you, Kev. Stu, what do you mean in hindsight? Did you never hear of the suspicious death of David Kelly, who knew that there were no weapons of mass destruction, says David H. Yes, of course, and, a lot of questions raised about Dr. Kelly, but, people blame various people for that. They blame Blair and his administration, they blame the BBC and pretty much anybody else. And it seems that Tony Blair was as convinced that there were weapons as David Kelly was convinced that there weren't. And either of them could, again, in hindsight, have been proved right. Lots of people are talking big, but sometimes doing nothing can be worse, and no one can predict the future. He said he was wrong and he's sorry, but he believed he was doing the right thing at the time. And as for the soldiers getting killed, they were in the army. If you don't want to get shot at, don't join the army, says Gary. I have to say I can't disagree with your logic, Gary. Afternoon stew. Now, come on, people. You all want to drive your cars and heat your homes, so take your heads out of the sand. It's an oil war, and that's all, says Gary and Ramsey. Yeah, well, various people have suggested that. Don't think Blair should be called a warmonger. It's unfair. He never made the decision alone. Thatcher was worse with the Falklands. They sank the Belgrano when it was in retreat. Bush is as much to blame. Saddam was a dictator. We've just gone through 9/11, so didn't know what was round the corner. Yeah, some good points there. Weapons of mass destruction were a smokescreen, Stu. It was all about oil. Why don't they go into North Korea or Iran or Syria? They've got them. Regime change is a lie as well. There are dozens of obnoxious dictators all over the world, but they're not threatening the USA's oil interests, says Alan. Interesting that we should get 2 or 3 texts all at the same time pretty much about oil. They knew there weren't any chemical weapons or weapons of mass destruction several months before it started. Blair just went ahead anyway like a megalomaniac along with Bush, says Dave. Well, that's how it appears, isn't it? Why would he, though? Why would he commit to truth? Is it about oil? Was it about payback for 9/11? Was it a case of Blair wanting to sort of attach himself to the coattails of Bush? I don't suppose that many of those questions would have been answered by the Chilcot inquiry. Bush wanted to get revenge for his daddy's failure to finish the deal with Saddam in Iraq. War 1 and the failed assassination plot on Bush Sr. funded by Hussein, was there? If he wanted revenge or face-saving for 9/11, he should have invaded Saudi Arabia. Yeah, right then. Stu, my dad always said no use crying when you join up. That's why you go. Sad as it is, that's war for you. Okay. Get it right, pal. He lied. He was going to war whatever happened. Nothing but a war criminal. Thousands of innocent men, women and children died because of his lies, says Steve. Oh, come on, Steve, get off the fence on it. Hundreds of thousands of people, I think, died because of that. It was about oil and the Gulf region in particular. They previously sold weapons to, was it Iran or Iraq? I think over the years they sold to both. Blair is a convenient scapegoat for the media frenzy we have. Well, I'm not convinced by that as an argument, but okay. I heard that part of the unofficial reason for invading Iraq was that America had declared boycotts on Iraq, so American oil companies couldn't do deals there, while the French and Russians were free to. Apparently the only way the big US oil companies could profit was through an invasion. What happened to the Prime Minister of the First World War? Sent thousands to their deaths out of the trenches. Not a lot, says Alex. Stuart thought it was a wise decision to keep Saddam Hussein in charge, to keep the other possible tyrants in check, and a blunder to get rid of him in the later campaign, says David H. The expert who advised Blair and Bush that Iraq had no weapons of mass destruction or chemical weapons was killed 2 days after his report was published. Fact, says Pat. I recommend to anyone who thinks the Iraq conflict wasn't about oil and billions of US dollars wrapped up in hundreds of US oil companies, which included Bush's family firm, watch the film Fahrenheit 9/11. The truth is frightening. Trust me, says Bill. Yes, I think I've seen that.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Should the swearing-in of new Lieutenant Governors take place in Castletown in future? This year's ceremony took place at Douglas Courthouse instead, but a Castletown commissioner thinks that shouldn't happen again and has presented a petition for redress of grievance to Tynwald this week. Where should the swearing-in take place, do you think? Would you like to see it return to Castletown, or is Douglas a better option? If it's ceremony that we're looking for, how about Peel Castle maybe? Regarding the swearing-in of the new governor, who really decided it should be in Douglas? I think the person doing the swearing-in, Deputy Governor, First Deemster, and while we're at it, Clerk of the Rolls too, it's a big title, would prefer the ceremony to be on their home patch in Douglas Courthouse. That's where he invests the likes of the Chief Constable and such as all the advocates when they call to the Manx Bar and taken in under his wing and control. And, of course, he does the business on members of the House of Keys and the Legislative Council just across the road in the Tynwald building. Castle Rushen could now just become a theme park or something, says Albert. Let's go to the lines because we've got Dave on, our Ballasalla correspondent. Hello, Dave.
I personally think that the governor should have been sworn in Castletown because Castletown is the ancient seat of government. I mean, the Lawn House was one of the governor's residences.
Sure, yeah.
Now, the problem being there is, A, the castle needs some money spending on it for, refurbishing, really.
Yeah, disabled access and things like that.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and I think that, yes, that should be done. But if we're taking it a step further, Castletown belongs to Maloo anyway.
Right.
Right? You look at the maps and you'll see Castletown is landlocked by Maloo and part of Arbury.
Okay.
Right? Scarlett, which is to the side of Castletown, belongs to Maloo, as with Derby Haven belongs to Maloo.
Okay.
So if we're being honest, why not give Castletown back to Maloo, to its rightful place?
There's a can of worms then.
Well, I mean, if you look at it, Stuart, I mean, I just said to Catherine, on the parish walk, they've got to touch every parish church gate.
Yeah.
They never go into Castletown.
Okay.
Because the parish church is Maloo.
Are you saying it's the Badlands? Is that the thing about Castletown?
No, I'm saying that Castletown should be put back where it belongs,
Right,
in
gotcha.
Maloo.
All right.
And where you've got, as I say, Scarlett at the other side of Castletown and Derby Haven this side of Castletown, it's obvious that when you look at the maps, Castletown should be back in Maloo where its rightful place is.
Fair dues. Okay, I'd never thought about that before, but I'm going to look at my maps now. Would they move Tynwald back to Bishop's Court, says Roy Kay. Well, that's kind of what I was wondering about that. Nobles Park, handy for everybody, and they can get parking as well. Robin Peel called, I think Castletown, as the ancient capital, should host it. Why don't they do it in the open air in the square? Ah, there's a thought. In the past, there have been gatherings of hundreds or even thousands of people there. It's quite a big area. Or is it just that they don't want the dignitaries to get wet? Hold it in the open air. Well, they can always have umbrellas and things, can't they? Let's have a referendum. Do we need a governor in 2016 in the day of the web and Skype, FaceTime, video links with Justice Department of the UK, President of Tynwald for all social events? Which is their main job? What is Mr. Leather on about? Forevermore, cost for one thing, all on us, the taxpayers. Time for a change. Just had a lord looking at our constitution at great cost and suggesting a panel to elect Legco, including 2 from off Ireland. Enough already. Okay. Davy's right. Castletown is Maloo, says Roy. I'm not very good on my parishes, I must admit. Why don't they do it on Tynwald Hill? Now, there's a thought. That might be a good place to do it, yeah. And they've got all the infrastructure for that. They've got the big canopy thing that they can put up for inclement weather. Yeah, I think that would be a good location. In line with constitutional changes about the governor over the years and the reduction of his powers and duties, a phone box in Ronagh will do. Enough room for a person being sworn in and the person doing the swearing. Throw back to colonial rule. We have to have one until constitution changes, but in line with the reduction in what the government does, the swearing in should be reduced as well. That includes all the British Army ceremonial at Tynwald. Rifles, cannons, not our day anymore. Many wonderful bands right here, akin to a display of power like North Korea, says one of our Manx chums. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, I think there is an irony about that, maybe. Stu, Isle of Man Film Festival are hosting 2 movies at Castle Rushen in September, Labyrinth and Robin Hood, so presumably there is space for a decent crowd. We definitely should have the island's heritage and history involved, with Castle Rushen being the venue for the swearing in of any governor. There are far too many heritage assets allowed to disappear. Sadly, the MNH spokesman appears to put bums on seats above heritage. And that's from Pauline. Thanks. Let's go to the lines and see what Ken makes of this. Hello, Ken.
Perhaps it's time to get rid of him altogether, because he's not exactly a tourist attraction, unlike his boss in London. But surely they can, if it's all down to a legal matter of being a court, surely they can get his boss to, make a court bigger for the day or something like that.
Yeah, I would have thought that there was enough room. I mean, I've only been to Castle Rushen a couple of times, but I would have
He
thought...
retired without him knowing, the last fella, so they must have known he was coming. So who really took the decision?
Well, I don't know. I don't know whether it was the officials behind the thing. I think there was a committee, wasn't there, that decides on these things. There usually is.
Talking about history, though, I was at Castle Rushen many years ago, and it was it's about a year before the Queen wound the clock up, seemingly.
All right.
When she came to the throne.
Yeah.
It must have been 53.
Yeah.
And it was so it was going back to early 2000s, and I thought, I rang up National Health. She said, wouldn't it be a good idea to get Her Majesty to come and wind it up again in 50 years?
Yeah.
So what's a good idea? Oh, bad news is we've got you about 3 years' notice, and it was only about a year.
Ah, right, okay.
You know, because she was obviously after 50 years, she had quite a heavy programme.
Well, I was going to say, she does have more of a social diary than I do, let's put it that way.
And me these days. So I don't know, it's just a shame that, history is supposed to be historical and things like that. And,
yeah. Okay. All right, so you think castles are best for that kind of thing, a bit of pomp and ceremony.
I don't know whether that many people want to go and see him getting sworn in.
I'm not sure how many people attended, to be honest, because that was one of the reasons that they couldn't, get all the people in it.
My invitation must have got lost in the post.
Yeah. Yours and mine both.
Anyway, that's it.
All right, Ken, always nice to talk to you. Thanks for getting in touch. Just a couple of thoughts. If Tony the Tash hadn't wasted loads of money on retracting bollards and granite, there may have been enough to do up the court in the castle. And second, why don't they swear him in at Betty's house in London? She could pick up the tab. Let's go to the lines because we've got George on. Hello, George.
The reason he gave it wasn't big enough in the old courtroom. Well, my opinion, why couldn't they have held it for once in the old House of Keys building?
Maybe, or invite fewer people. I mean, it's been big enough for years, hasn't it?
Yeah, cut a lot of the hangers-on out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, all right. So, I don't know how big the old House of Keys building is.
Well, I looked at it. The House of Keys must have done all their business there years ago.
Yeah.
It was big enough for them. Surely it'd be good, just for the one-off there.
Yeah, you'd have thought. All right, George, nice talking to you. Thanks for calling us today. And on line 3, we've got Norman. Hello, Norman.
I'm very interested in the history of Castle Rushen because I've written part of the history when I was a prison, you see.
Oh, right.
And in the 1600s, all the courts were held in the open air there, inside the castle itself.
Right.
And in those days, the MHKs were all in attendance at all the courts of general jail delivery as well.
Oh,
All right, so it was a judicial job as well as legislation stuff?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And it wasn't just a Deemster and that. They had the jury of 12 people, 12 men, and of course all the MHKs there and the clergy and that. So it was quite a spectacular thing.
Yes.
Although the men themselves were actually chained to a bar, so that's why prisoners are called to the bar.
Ah.
So they're actually chained to the bar, you see.
Right. Oh, this is interesting. Good.
Yeah, but of course, you see that they only went into the actual courthouse, I think, maybe about 100 years ago. I don't know when it started going in the courthouse. Or the swearing in, I haven't a clue about it.
No, I don't know, I'm afraid.
But they actually had all the open-air courts were there. In fact, where the Deemster actually sat was actually on the site where the last execution was taking place.
Oh, right, nice, yeah.
So it's a lot of tradition in Castle Rushen, and it would be ideal to go back there, I think.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Thank you for calling today, Norman. It's nice to hear your voice for a change.
Talking Heads, brought to you by Magic Carpets, with the only Carndine design showroom on the island.
That's it for the latest look back at Talking Heads. Our thanks as ever to everyone who took part in the programme. If you'd like to get involved in the discussion yourself, you can call, text or email between midday and 2 p.m. on weekdays, or you can share your thoughts on the Facebook page. That's Talking Heads with Stu Peters. You can listen back to each day's programme in full using the on-demand section of manxradio.com, and you'll also get a daily update of what's being discussed on the programme each day on the website. You can also keep up to date with that information by liking the Facebook page or following Stu Manx on Twitter. And if there's anything you think we should be discussing on the programme, why not suggest it to us by emailing talk@manxradio.com. But that's it for now, so until next time, goodbye.
Don't sit in the slow lane. Join the fast lane right now with Shaw's all-new Superfast Plus broadband. Enjoy more bandwidth, amazing speeds and the best value on the island from just £23.95 per month. So don't be left behind. Get a piece of the high-speed action with Superfast Plus broadband from Shaw. For details, visit our stores in Douglas, Ramsey and Port Erin or click shaw.com.
Love being Shaw.
Terms and conditions apply.